The characteristics of perfection. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you and pray for those who persecute and slander you. For if you love only those who love you, what reward will you have? Do not the publicans do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what are you doing that is more than what others do? Do not the pagans also do the same? Therefore, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Matt 5:44, 46-48.
Since God possesses infinite perfection in all things, the maxim, "Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect," if taken literally, would presuppose the possibility of attaining absolute perfection. If it were given to the creature to be as perfect as the Creator, the former would become equal to the latter, which is inadmissible. However, the people to whom Jesus spoke would not have understood this nuance. He limited himself to presenting them with a model and told them to put forth the effort to emulate it. One must, therefore, understand these words to mean a relative perfection, which humanity is able to achieve and which brings it closest to divinity. What does such perfection consist of? Jesus told us to love our enemies, do good to those who hate us, and pray for those who persecute us. In this way he shows that the essence of perfection is charity in its broadest definition, because it entails the practice of all other virtues. In fact, by observing the results of all vices, and even the simplest defects, one will realize that there is not one of them that does not alter the sentiment of charity to some degree, because they all have their origin in selfishness and pride, which are the negation of charity. This is because everything that overexcites the sentiment of personality destroys, or at least weakens, the elements of true charity, benevolence, indulgence, self-denial, and devotion. Love for one's neighbor, taken so far as to loving one's enemies, cannot ally itself with any defect contrary to charity, and therefore is always an indication of a greater or lesser moral ascendancy. Hence it follows that the degree of perfection is in direct proportion to the range of such love. This is why Jesus, after having given his disciples the guidelines of the most sublime charity, said to them, "Therefore, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Moral persons. Truly moral persons are those who practice the law of justice, love, and charity in its greatest purity. If they question their conscience about their actions, they will ask themselves if they have violated this law, if they have committed any wrongdoing, if they have done all the good they could, if they have willingly disregarded any opportunity to be useful, if anyone might have a complaint about them, and, lastly, if they have done unto others everything they would like to have done unto themselves. They have faith in God, and in God's goodness, justice, and wisdom. They know that nothing happens without God's permission, so they submit to the divine will in everything. They have faith in the future, thus, they place spiritual possessions above temporal ones. They know that all vicissitudes of life, all its sorrows and all its disappointments, are trials or expiations, and they accept them without complaining. Persons imbued with the sentiment of charity and love for their neighbor do the good for its own sake without expecting anything in return, and they repay evil with good, defend the weak against the strong, and always sacrifice their own interests to the interests of justice. They find satisfaction in the benefits they spread around, the service they render, the happiness they promote, the tears they dry, and the consolation they provide to the afflicted. Their first impulse is to think of others before thinking of themselves, and to attend to the interests of others before their own. The selfish, on the other hand, calculate the profits and losses entailed in every generous act. Moral persons are kind, humane, and benevolent toward all regardless of race or creed, because they regard all people as their brothers and sisters. They respect all sincere convictions that others might hold to, and they do not anathematize those who do not think like they do. In all circumstances, charity is their guide. They tell themselves that those who harm others with malevolent words, who hurt others' feelings with their pride and disdain, who do not recoil from the idea of causing suffering or difficulty, however slight, when it could be avoided, fail in their duty of love for their neighbor and do not deserve the Lord's clemency. They hold no hatred or rancor or desire for vengeance. Following Jesus' example, they forgive and forget offenses, and remember only good deeds, because they know that they will be forgiven according to how they themselves have forgiven. They are indulgent toward others' weaknesses, for they know that they themselves need indulgence, and they recall these words of Christ, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." They never take pleasure in searching for defects in others or in calling attention to them. If necessity forces them to do so, they always look for the good that might mitigate the evil. They study their own imperfections and strive incessantly to combat them. All their efforts are focused on being able to say to themselves tomorrow that they are better than they were yesterday. They do not seek to exalt their spirit or talents at the expense of others. Instead, they seize every opportunity to point out what is praiseworthy in other people. They do not gloat over their wealth or their personal advantages, for they know that everything that has been given to them can be taken away. They use but do not abuse the possessions that have been accorded to them, for they know that it is a trust for which they will have to render an accounting, and that the worst use of it in regards to themselves would be to use it to satisfy their passions. If the social order has placed others under their tutelage, they treat them with kindness and benevolence, because they are their equals before God. They use their authority to lift their morale and not to squash them with their pride. They avoid anything that could render their subordinate's position more painful. Those who are subordinate, on the other hand, understand the duties of their position and are scrupulous in consciously fulfilling them. Finally, moral persons respect in their fellow beings all the rights arising from the laws of nature, in the same way they wish their own to be respected. This is not a list of all the qualities that define moral persons, but whoever makes an effort to possess them is on the road that leads to all the others. Good Spiritists. Spiritism, when well understood, but especially when well felt, inevitably leads to the results listed above, which characterize the true Spiritist as well as the true Christian, for they are one and the same. Spiritism does not create a new morality, it only makes it easier for people to understand and practice the morality of Christ by providing an unshakable and enlightened faith to those who doubt or waver. Nonetheless, many of those who believe in spirit manifestations understand neither their consequences nor their moral implications, or if they do not apply them to themselves. To what may this be attributed? To a lack of precision in the doctrine? No, because the doctrine contains no allegories or symbols that could give way to erroneous interpretations. Clarity is its very essence, and that is what makes it powerful, for it goes directly to one's intelligence. It contains nothing mysterious, and its adherents do not possess any secret that is hidden from ordinary people. Thus, is an exceptional intelligence needed to understand it? No, since one sees individuals with notable capacities who do not comprehend it, while average minds, even young people who have barely left adolescence, understand its most subtle nuances with admirable precision. This derives from the fact that the somewhat material aspect of the Spiritist science requires only eyes to observe, whereas the essential aspect requires a certain degree of sensibility, which one might call maturity of the moral sense, regardless of age and level of education, since it is particularly inherent to the development of the incarnate spirit. In sum, the material ties are still too tenacious to allow the spirit to disengage itself from the things of the world, because the fog that envelopes them obscures their vision of the infinite. Consequently, they do not easily break with their tastes or their habits, as they do not understand anything better than what they have. The belief in spirits is for them a simple fact, but it does nothing or very little to change their instinctive tendencies. In other words, they see only a ray of light, insufficient to guide them and endow them with a powerful aspiration capable of overcoming their inclinations. These persons are much more interested in the phenomena than the morality, which seems banal and monotonous. They incessantly demand that spirits introduce them to new mysteries, without asking if they are worthy of grasping the secrets of the Creator. These individuals are imperfect spiritists, some remaining stationary or distancing themselves from their brothers and sisters in the faith, recoiling at the obligation of reforming themselves, or otherwise reserving their sympathies for those who share their weaknesses or prejudices. Nevertheless, acceptance of the principles of the doctrine is a first step that will make the second easier in a future existence. Those who may rightfully be regarded as true and sincere spiritists are at a higher degree of moral advancement. Their spirit dominates matter more completely, thus gives them a clearer perception of the future. The principles of the doctrine make fibers vibrate within them that remain dormant in the former. In short, their heartstrings are touched, therefore, their faith is unshakable. Some are like the musician who is moved by certain chords, when others hear only the sounds. True spiritists are recognized by their moral transformation and the efforts they make to overcome their bad inclinations. While the former are content with their limited horizon, the latter understand that there is something better. They make the effort to free themselves, and they always reach their goal if they maintain a firm will.
Parable of the Sower. On that same day Jesus, having left the house, sat down close to the sea, and a large crowd of people gathered around him. Therefore, he climbed into a boat and sat down, while the people remained on the shore. He then told them many things in parables, speaking to them in this way. A sower went out to sow, and as he was sowing, some of the seeds fell by the wayside, and the birds of the sky came and ate them. Other seeds fell upon stony places where there was not much earth. They soon sprouted because the soil was not very deep. But when the sun came up it scorched them, and since they had no roots, they withered. Still other seeds fell among thorns, and when they began to grow, the thorns choked them. Finally, some seeds fell on good ground and produced a crop, some rendering 100 to 1, others 60 and others 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Matt. 13:1-9. Hear therefore the parable of the sower. Whoever hears the word of the kingdom but does not heed it, the evil spirit comes and takes away what had been sown in his heart. This is the one who received the seeds by the wayside. He who received the seeds among the stones is the one who hears the word and receives it joyously as soon as he hears it. But he has no roots in himself, and it lasts only for a while. And when obstacles and persecutions on account of the word overcome him, he soon regards it as an object of offense and ruin. He who receives the seeds among the thorns is the one who hears the word, but then the cares of the times and the illusions of riches choke the word within him, rendering it unfruitful. But he who receives the seeds on good soil is the one who hears the word, who heeds it and who produces a crop, rendering 100 or 60 or 30 to 1. Matt. 13:18-23.
The parable of the sower perfectly represents the nuances that exist in the ways one profits from the teachings of the gospel. How many people there are, in fact, for whom the gospel teachings are only a dead letter, which, like the seeds that have fallen on the stony soil, produces no crop. This parable finds a no less correct application in the different categories of spiritists. Is it not a symbol of those who are interested only in the physical phenomena but derive nothing of consequence from them because they see them as nothing more than an object of curiosity? Those who seek nothing but the wonder in spirit communications, who are interested in them only to the extent that they satisfy their imagination, but who, after having received them, remain as cold and indifferent as they were in the first place. Who find the counsels to be very good and admirable, yet apply them only to others and not to themselves. And lastly, those for whom the teachings are like the seeds that fall on good soil and yield a crop.
The Spirit's teachings. Duty.
Duty is an individual's moral obligation, first toward him or herself and toward others immediately thereafter. Duty is the law of life. It is found in the smallest details as well as in the loftiest acts. I want to speak here only about moral duty and not the type imposed by the professions. In the order of sentiments, duty is very difficult to fulfill because it is contrary to the seductions of self-interest and the heart. Its victories have no witnesses and its failures undergo no repression. People's inner duty is left to their free will. The sting of conscience, that guardian of inner rectitude, warns and upholds them, but it is held back, often powerless, before the sophistry of passion. When faithfully obeyed, the duty of the heart uplifts people. But how is such a duty determined? Where does it begin? Where does it end? Duty begins precisely at the point in which you threaten your neighbor's happiness or peace of mind. It ends at the limit you would not want to see surpassed regarding yourselves. God created all humans equal regarding suffering. Small or great, ignorant or educated, they all suffer for the same reasons so that each may judiciously determine the evil he or she might do. The same criterion, however, does not exist regarding the good, which is infinitely more varied in its expressions. Equality in the face of suffering is a sublime provision by God, who wishes that all his children, taught by common experience, do not commit evil alleging ignorance of its effects. Duty is the practical summary of all moral speculation. It is the courage of the soul who confronts the distress of life's struggles. It is both strict and yielding. Ready to adapt itself to diverse complications, it remains unbending before temptation. Persons who fulfill their duty love God more than they love other individuals, and they love others more than they love themselves. They are at the same time judge and slave in their own cause. Duty is the most beautiful laurel of reason, and depends on it like a child depends on its mother. Humans must love duty, not because it preserves them against life's evils. Humankind cannot shirk those, but because it provides the soul with the strength it needs for its development. Duty grows and radiates under a more elevated form at each of the higher stages of humanity. Individuals' moral obligation toward God never ceases, as they must reflect the virtues of the Eternal One, who does not accept an imperfect sketch, because he wants the beauty of his work to be resplendent before him.
Lazare, Paris, 1863.
Virtue. In its highest expression, virtue encompasses all the essential qualities that comprise the good person. To be good, charitable, hard-working, reasonable and modest are the qualities of a virtuous individual. Unfortunately, they are frequently accompanied by small moral ills that tarnish and weaken them. Those who flaunt their virtues are not virtuous, since they lack the principal quality, which is modesty, and display the vice most contrary to it, which is pride. A virtue truly worthy of its name does not like to show itself off. One might divine it, but it hides itself in obscurity and flees from the admiration of the masses. Saint Vincent Delaware Paul was virtuous. The praiseworthy priest of Ars was virtuous, and many others little known to the world, but known to God. All these individuals were unaware that they were virtuous. They allowed themselves to be carried along by the stream of their saintly inspirations, and practiced the good with complete disinterestedness and self-forgetfulness. It is to virtue thus understood and practiced that I invite you, my children. It is to this truly Christian and truly Spiritist virtue that I advise you to devote yourselves. But keep from your hearts the thoughts of pride, vanity, and self-centeredness, which always tarnish the most beautiful qualities. Do not imitate those who set themselves up as models, and who toot their own horn about their qualities for all who are complacent enough to listen. This virtue of ostentation often hides a multitude of small turpitudes and obnoxious weaknesses. In principle, individuals who exalt themselves, who erect a statue to their own virtue, annul by this very act any real merit they might have. However, what can I say about those whose whole worth is to appear to be what they are not? I readily admit that individuals who practice the good feel an inner satisfaction at the bottom of their heart, but whenever such satisfaction is exteriorized in order to receive praise, it degenerates into self-centeredness. O all of you whom the Spiritist faith has warmed with its rays, and who know how far humans are from perfection, do not ever yield to such folly. Virtue is a grace that I desire for all sincere Spiritists, but I will say to them, better to have less virtue with modesty than more with pride, for it is through pride that successive humanities have been lost, and it is through humility that they will someday be redeemed.
François Nicolas Madeleine, Paris, 1863.
Superiors and subordinates. Authority, as much as wealth, is a trust for which those who have been vested with it will have to render an accounting. Do not think that it is given to them to provide them with a vain pleasure of command, nor should you be like most of the power holders of the earth, who wrongly believe that it is a right, a property. God, meanwhile, provides them with proof enough that it is neither, for he takes it from them at will. If it were a privilege inherent to them, it would be inalienable. However, no one can say that something belongs to them when it can be taken without their consent. God gives authority either as a mission or a trial when he deems it appropriate, and takes it away in the same manner. All those who are trustees of authority to whatever extent, from masters over their servants to sovereigns over their people, should not forget the fact that it is souls who are under their charge, that they will answer for the good or bad guidance they have given to their subordinates, and that the wrongs their subalterns might commit and the vices to which they might yield as a result of such guidance or bad examples will fall upon them, whereas they will reap the fruits of their kindness, for leading them to the good. All people on earth have a mission, great or small. Whatever it may be, it is always given for the purpose of goodness. To deviate it from its principle, therefore, is to fail in fulfilling it. If God asks the wealthy, "What have you done with the wealth that in your hands should have been a source for spreading prosperity all around you?" He will ask of those who possess some degree of authority, "What have you done with this authority? What evils have you prevented? What progress have you fostered? If I have given you subordinates, it was not so that you could make them slaves to your will, or tame instruments for your whims or your greed. I made you strong and entrusted you with those who were weak in order to uphold them and help them ascend to me. Superiors who conform to the words of Christ despise none of those who are beneath them, for they know that social distinctions mean nothing before God. Spiritism teaches them that if their subordinates obey them today, they might have commanded them in the past, or might do so in the future, and that they will then be treated according to how they have treated their subalterns. If superiors have duties to fulfill, subordinates, on their part, have theirs also, and they are no less sacred. If the latter are Spiritists, their conscience will tell them even more strongly that they are not exempted from their duties, even when their superiors fail to fulfill theirs, because Spiritists know that one must not repay evil with evil, and that the wrongs of some do not authorize the wrongs of others. If their position entails suffering, They tell themselves that they most assuredly must have warranted it, because they perhaps abused their authority in the past, and must in turn feel the improprieties they made others suffer. If they are forced to endure such a position because they cannot find a better one, Spiritism teaches them to resign themselves to it as a trial for the humility needed for their advancement. Their belief guides their conduct. They act as they would want their subordinates to act toward them if they were the boss. For this reason they are more scrupulous in fulfilling their obligations, since they understand that any negligence in the work that has been entrusted to them is harmful to those who pay them and to whom they owe their time and efforts. In other words, Spiritists abide by the sentiment of duty that their faith gives them, along with the certainty that any detour from the straight and narrow will be a debt that will have to be paid sooner or later.
François Nicolas Madeleine, Cardinal Morlet, Paris, 1863.
The individual in the world. A sentiment of compassion must always animate the hearts of those who gather under the Lord's sight and implore the assistance of good spirits. Therefore, purify your heart, do not let any mundane or futile thought linger in it. Lift up your spirit to those you are calling, so that, finding in you the proper dispositions, they may profusely sow the seed that should germinate in your soul and produce within it the fruit of charity and justice. Therefore, do not think that in incessantly exhorting you to prayer and mental evocation we wish to advise you to live a mystic life that keeps you outside the laws of the society in which you have been condemned to live. No. Live with the men and women of your time in the way that men and women should live. Surrender to the necessities, even the frivolities, of the day, but do it with a sentiment of purity, which may sanctify them. You have been called to enter into contact with spirits of different natures and opposite characters. Do not clash with any of those with whom you might find yourself. Be cheerful and happy, but of the cheerfulness provided by a clear conscience, and the happiness of the heirs of heaven, counting the days that will draw them nearer to their inheritance. Virtue does not consist in assuming a stern and gloomy face, rejecting the pleasures that your human conditions allow. It is sufficient to report all the actions of your life to the Creator who has given such life. It is sufficient, when one begins or finishes a deed, to lift one's thought to that Creator and ask Him, in an impulse of the soul, for His watch care to succeed, or for His blessing once finished. In all that you do, look to the source of all things. Never do anything without the thought of God purifying and sanctifying your life. As Christ has said, perfection is found entirely in the practice of absolute charity, but the duties of charity extend to all social positions from the lowest to the highest. Those who live in isolation would have no charity to practice. It is only through contact with their fellow beings, in the most arduous struggles, that they find an opportunity to practice it. Thus, those who isolate themselves intentionally deprive themselves of the most powerful means of perfection, since they have only themselves to think of. Their lives are those of a selfish person. Do not imagine, therefore, that in order to live in constant communication with us, to live in the Lord's sight, you must fasten on the sillus and cover yourselves with ashes. No, no, and once more no. Be happy in accordance with the needs of humankind, but may your happiness never hold a thought or commit an action that might offend God, or anything that might cloud the face of those who love and guide you. God is love, and He blesses all those who love virtuously.
A Protector Spirit, Bordeaux, 1863.
Caring for the body and the spirit. Does moral perfection consist in the mortification of the body? In order to resolve this question, I will rely on elementary principles, and I will begin by demonstrating the need for caring for the body, which, according to the alternatives of health and infirmity, influences in a very important way the soul, which must be regarded as a prisoner in the flesh. In order for this prisoner to live, move about, and even conceive of the illusion of freedom, the body must be sound, of good disposition and vigorous. Let us establish a comparison. Supposing that body and soul are both in a perfect state, what should they do to maintain the balance between their aptitudes and needs so different in nature? Here, two systems confront each other, that of the ascetics, who want to bring down the body, and that of the materialists, who want to bring down the soul. Two forms of violence, each almost as foolish as the other. And alongside these two large groups swarm the countless multitudes of the indifferent, who, with neither conviction nor compassion, love with tepidness and are sparing with their joys. Where then is wisdom? Where then is the science of living? Nowhere. And this big problem would have remained entirely unsolved if Spiritism had not come to assist those who study the issue by showing them the relationship between the body and the soul, and to tell them that since they are necessary for each other, both must be cared for. So love your soul, but care also for your body, the soul's instrument. Being heedless of the needs that are indicated by nature itself means to be heedless of the law of God. Do not punish your body for the wrongs that your free will has made it commit, and for which it is no more responsible than a badly ridden horse for any accident it might cause. Hence, will you be more perfect if you torture your body but remain no less selfish and proud, nor more charitable toward your neighbor? No, perfection does not lie in this. It lies entirely in the reforms to which you submit your spirit. Discipline it, subjugate it, humiliate it, and mortify it. That is the way to make it docile to God's will, and the only way that leads to perfection.
Georges, A Protector Spirit, Paris, 1863.